Hello, welcome to the inaugural episode of Ill-Informed, International Law Informed, where we explore topics of international law, politics and relations. Each month I'll be interviewing an expert or budding mind on a relevant topic area within these three categories, and it will just be an exploration of some of the emergent concepts in these fields. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. So to begin, we've got Morgan Simpson in the house. Welcome. How are you doing?
Doing really well. Thank you for having me on.
Glad to hear. I must say it was very difficult to secure Morgan's attendance.
I won't say that you offered Tony Blair levels of speaker fee, but it was close to that.
That just shows you the amount we had to put in to extract this man from his busy schedule. Really, I've never had to labour so hard to secure a guest. I think the big issue was proximity. Not lack of, but too much of it. We're actually housemates, and apparently that doesn't lead to easy coordination between schedules. But we're here now, and we won't talk about the exorbitant fees you will receive. The reason I invited Morgan in today, humorous anecdote aside, is because, to my mind, Morgan is an early adopter of a really sort of vibrant, happening thing in our world today, and that is, of course, AI. You can barely move for stories about AI and new apps and new updates and new everything. AI is the thing. It's the zeitgeist. It's the thing everyone's talking about. And it seems to dominate a lot of our media conversation and our sense of what the future will look like. But Morgan, during our time together at university, sort of hopped on this train quite early. He saw that governance of AI, making sure the development of AI was done in a secure way that guarded against existential threats to humanity. He saw that this was an emergent area and one that he wanted to contribute to. He would host weekly podcast discussions where we talk about the different sort of ethical components of the development of AI and scope out different models of what the future could look like.
I remember, maybe just to jump in there, I remember this time in 2018 where we were running this workshop. I brought these cards which represent different jobs, and in a pretty small group we talked what felt like very abstractly then about when these jobs might start to be displaced by AI, and we just generated a sort of rough timeline based on our intuitions and some little rules of thumb, and I ran that same workshop again a couple of years ago, and it's so interesting to have that be a practical, physical thing which is happening now when it was almost completely abstract in 2018.
Yeah, and that just shows how the landscape has shifted in just a couple of years. That what previously seemed like dystopian abstract discussions now feel very material, relevant, of the moment. But yeah, Morgan's engagement with this issue has in turn inspired me to engage with the issue, albeit in sort of less professional context, in a more casual sense. So Morgan, as an opening gambit, I'd just like to hear what it was for you about this AI train that made you want to hop on it quite early, or do you even agree with my characterization of you as an early adopter?
Yeah, okay, well, maybe I'll give you a little bit of context as to those early days for me, and then go forward from there to where we are now. But I guess I think that you're pointing to something really important, which is that the AI development and I guess these sort of risk-based theories of AI and its progress have been around really since the 50s, and so I think we should give plenty of credit to the early thinkers in that field as well. So I guess for me, like many people, I was interested in university to find an important issue to dedicate my life to. And I guess there I was looking for something that was both the right shape in terms of intellectual interest, that felt really important for this period in which I might have some impact with my career, which is really the next 40 years, and really pressing. I think using heuristics roughly like that, AI felt like a pretty natural thing to focus on. I'm really glad that the community of people concerned with AI risk has really grown in that time, although I think the challenges also feel a bit more material now than they did before. But yeah, I guess as a small summary, within the field of AI, I was looking for a really important issue. I flirted with AI security, so I wrote my master's dissertation on lethal autonomous weapon systems, which I think is still a very important issue, and in general military strategy with AI. Also worked a little bit on international governance, corporate governance. So I've done fellowships with, I guess, Stanford University, with centers connected to the University of Oxford, and then I guess most recently I've worked as a research manager. So although I mostly was working on like a pretty deep level on various topics, now I work another kind of, unfortunately, much more shallow level, but over a much bigger section of topics. But yeah, obviously, I think there's lots to know. It's a big scientific area, so yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for telling us a bit about yourself and your own journey with AI. I wondered if you could maybe go back to what you said about early adopters actually being people in the 1950s. Could you maybe guide us a bit as to how we've got to here in the development of AI?
So like any field, it's a long history, and so I'm going to have to give you some tools to understand that history a little bit better. I want to maybe introduce 3 different inputs to AI capabilities that are really important. So if you can understand these 3 terms, then you understand a good chunk of what's feeding AI progress. So algorithms, this is essentially the structure the models have, the architectures of the models, the methods by which AI researchers make progress. The next bucket is compute. So if I said computing power, I think that's a pretty good description of what compute is. So we're talking about the processing units in big data centers. We're talking about all of those, all of that computing power, which feeds those calculations which go on within AI models. And then the third bucket is data. So if we go back to the 1950s, there's this really impressive early idea of a neural network. This is basically the same architecture that we have built the really complex models from. It was made in the 1950s, or at least first implemented in the 1950s. So this model, the perceptron, is a very simple one-layer neural network. It's using a really sort of handmade, simple data set, and it's using a tiny computer. So it's like really can only classify very simple objects. So you can feed in images, and it can like sort of point to some shapes. Now we're going to have to go 56 years later until we start to see real progress. So that's sometimes considered an AI winter. So
56 years later takes us to which date?
To 2012.
Right.
So we're now in the AlexNet era. So we see this really impressive development of a system which uses this early idea of deep learning, which was made around this time in the 1950s, but is able to deploy it to very quickly jump beyond what humans thought was possible with image classifiers. So there's this big database called ImageNet. That's the data portion. It has millions of images. We have the compute portion. At this time, we're starting to see graphics processing units kick off. So these are like specialized for like video games, and surprisingly, these seem to work really well for the sorts of computations, matrix multiplication computations, which go on within AI models. And we have this really impressive convolutional neural network, which is like a more complicated version of that neural network. And now we're starting to see this AI model like be a really successful image classifier.
Okay, just to pause for a second. In this 2012 moment, sort of who and where and what companies or states are we talking about?
So this is like an amateur program. Essentially, it's called AlexNet, which is a really fun idea because it was the main person behind this application of deep learning to a convolutional neural network in this way was some guy called Alex. So we're not talking about big companies at this point. We're talking about early scientific ideas, which obviously is like a really exciting place for this to come from. And we're talking only 13 years ago when the field looked like that.
And Alex was based where?
In the US.
In Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I think in Silicon Valley.
Before it was really known as Silicon Valley, I guess.
No, I guess
nascent time.
I guess at this stage the AI revolution really hasn't kicked off in Silicon Valley, but still there's like semiconductors are like a big driving force, and so Texas Instruments and some other big companies in that world.
Okay, so moving forward.
So two more really important checkpoints. So if we go forward 8 years to 2020, you might recognize the name of this model, GPT-3. So if we think that GPT-4 was the model behind the big ChatGPT wave a couple of years ago, GPT-3 is its immediate precursor. So I'll just break down GPT, generative pre-trained transformer. The really big architectural algorithmic progress for this model is the transformer, which is, again, a different sort of architecture building on the idea of a simple neural network. If we're talking about compute, that second cluster, we're talking about huge, expensive millions of dollars to train a single model, and they're like dedicated compute clusters full of GPUs. And if we're talking about data, we're getting close to the whole internet is being used to train this model. So if you think just like millions of images to roughly the whole internet of text data, this is a text model. And then if we take a step forward now to 2024, we see...
Okay, but just on this GPT model, again, I'm interested in the who, what, and the where of it.
Yep.
Who is developing this?
The GPT series is the sort of name given to models created by OpenAI. So this has become really the frontier company. It's consistently releasing the best models or close to the best models in the world, and they're based in San Francisco.
Okay, and would you have a comment on why OpenAI was the company to be that frontier company? Did they have a cluster of sort of the smartest AI people that happened to gather in Silicon Valley? You know, why was it that company and not another?
Yeah, so there's a really interesting gap at the frontier where there really, at that time, was only a few scientists which could really work out how to apply that architecture of a transformer. So we're talking about the cutting edge people who are reading these papers and are really understanding them and are applying them. So that's already cutting it down to a subsection. But then you also need a lot of VC funding, because a really important transformation between the AlexNet days of the like amateur people making their small models to GPT-3 is that it's become really incredibly expensive to run those like millions of models worth of computations to train a model.
And why is it so expensive?
It's basically so expensive because not only are the neural networks themselves much bigger, which means that the calculations which go on, maybe we can get to the sort of structure of a neural network a bit later on, but if you have in mind that that first neural network consisted of a single layer, and then neural networks have become like larger, not only is that expensive in and of itself, but they realize that if you just throw more and more money at this problem and have loads of parameters being sort of calculations, which come in two parts: weights and biases. If you throw loads of money, you just make progress. That's called the sort of scaling law. Nowadays we might call it the pre-training scaling law. And essentially it became expensive because people realized that the more money you put into that,
Right.
the better results you get.
Okay. So it's always the hunger for investment never abates, and investors are interested because they see the potential upside as astronomical.
That's an interesting way of framing it. I think during this period, it's not clear what sort of value the companies might eventually have. It's not clear what sort of value the models might have. There is this really compelling idea, and I would probably give Sam Altman some credit as well. And maybe this is part of the reason that OpenAI was so successful. Sam Altman and some other really Ilya Sutskever, some AI leaders in this time were like really good storytellers, and so they were able to convince venture capitalists that if you put money into this, eventually it might have this huge payoff. And I would say that they've continued to be really good storytellers in that way.
Okay, so I interrupted you. We were talking about development of GPT in 2020. What was the next step?
Cool. So the next one I want to highlight is the O1 reasoning model, again from OpenAI. So where you might think that these like simple scaling laws got us from ImageNet with some new architectures, but to GPT-3, it was the case that pre-training scaling law seemed to taper out. It seemed like when we were throwing more and more compute at that pre-training stage, which is just a stage of training. I know that's slightly misleading title for it, but that pre-training stage, throwing more compute at that problem didn't make as much progress as people were expecting. And so they started to think, what are some other clever things we can do in this sort of chain that will make it so our models can perform better at benchmarks that we've set. So within that, I especially want to point to the reasoning part of O1. So O1 is what we'll call a reasoning model. And that means that not only is there that huge spending for pre-training, for post-training, for our LHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback, and lots and lots of fine-tuning. So we could count those all as training. There's also this huge cluster afterwards, which is inference. So that's the reasoning part of that model. Essentially, that model is not only really smart, not only does it really understand language very well, but it's being deployed in this really interesting way, where it's thinking in some, and that's slightly too anthropomorphized, but it's doing some process after that. And so you can actually see for these models their chain of thought. You can see how they're sort of reasoning around a problem, and that basically is a really important pillar, which has gotten us to the stage where we can talk about AI agents, which aren't just like performing very quick calculations, sort of guessing the next token, guessing the next word in a sentence, but they're actually solving problems. And that development, that sort of reasoning component, was a really important brick in that puzzle.
I can't say I really understand how, sort of what the innovation was between GPT and O1. Kind of was it the case that GPT was lacking this reasoning quality in its AI? It didn't have that.
Yes. So maybe I can frame it this way. GPT-3 was a great problem solver. It was great at writing essays. It was good at writing like simple high school level essays. It's good at getting a bunch of inputs, which is the question you feed in, putting it through this big sort of black box transformation and spitting something out. And it would do that very quickly because essentially it's going into this model, it's like spitting it around, and then the thing it spits out is like pretty good. The difference between that is that the O1 model and other reasoning models have this extra stage afterwards where not only is it spitting out things from the original model, but it's piecing them together in a really interesting way, which currently, at least in the chain of thought, seems to resemble something a bit closer to how humans reason. So you might think, instead of inputting what's the capital of France into here, and it just like spitting out a city, maybe it's Paris, maybe it's Berlin. Instead, it's spitting out several, and it's thinking which of those is the right one, and it's reasoning why might it be right. What sort of relationship does Paris have to other places in the world?
Okay, so GPT-3 responded to prompts in a more of a scattergun way, you might say. It farted out things, be they correct or not. GPT-4 has reasoning capacity. It's able to almost critique itself. And I guess we could spend a long time talking about like the technicality of how it's able to do that. But we probably don't have time for that. Okay, so what would your next step be in the evolution of AI?
Well, I guess that's when we start to look to the future, and there's been a few different visions of that future that I think it'd be useful to talk about.
Okay, but you haven't touched on kind of the consumer interaction with AI. I'd just be interested to hear your comment on that because, you know, ChatGPT-3, I think that was
GPT-3 and then
GPT-3. That's when it hit the consumer, right?
Yeah, GPT-4 is the model which underlies this big transformation we see in the ways that AI companies are interacting with consumers, which is instead of selling their products exclusively to companies, they start to host platforms that are like widely accessible, where you can just ask questions and they'll spit out responses to those. So that transformation happens with GPT-4, and that's where we see the ChatGPT, and then other leading AI companies. We're talking about Anthropic, we're talking about XAI, we're talking about Gemini, start to make developments there as well.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact statistic, but kind of the number of people who took on ChatGPT.
The uptake of ChatGPT was the fastest application uptake in human history.
Yeah, like put kind of other social media uptakes completely in the shade, which I guess it was a credit to the storytelling ability of the likes of Sam Altman. VCs would have been licking their lips at that, rate of uptake. But to provoke us further in this discussion, I want now to turn to a dystopian vision of the future that recently emerged that caught my attention, called AI 2027. Now, I've summarized what's on their website. I recommend you read it. And also BBC made a really helpful clip where they visualized what is said in this. So it's produced by an organization called the AI Futures Project, and I'll talk you through it. It's sort of their timeline of how AI evolves and how it affects humanity. So 2025, where we are now. AI progress continues. There's huge hype. There's big investment in infrastructure. There's the release of unreliable AI agents. Skepticism remains amongst the journalist class and the academic class as to the likely timeline for the emergence of artificial general intelligence or superintelligent AI. And so there's a degree of maybe laissez-fairness amongst the political class in terms of the urgency of regulating this area. The general belief is, okay, it's moving quick, but we've got time before shit hits the fan. 2026. China perceives itself falling behind the US in terms of compute capacity. So we spoke about compute earlier, an essential element in the effectiveness of an AI tool. As such, China centralizes all their AI chips in what the Futures Project calls a centralized development zone, which contains millions of GPUs. Now, if you can bookmark this at the end of this, I'd like you to talk about GPUs. And this amounts to 10% of the world's AI compute. Okay? fast forward to 2027. There's a fictional company called OpenBrain, which is clearly a homage to OpenAI. And they get to a stage where their coding is entirely automated, so done by AIs. And at this point, the world's best AI researchers, machine learning algorithm guys, just sit back and watch their babies, their creations, fueling the development of the next AI evolution, the development of the next AI system. In this dystopian scenario, China steals the model weights. I'd like, if you could talk about that technicality, that would also be good. And it does this because China has fallen behind the US in terms of its software development, and so it considers that only by stealing the weights can it somehow sort of re-energize its pursuit of AGI, artificial general intelligence. The US government is conscious that China has stolen the weights, and so it seeks to be more intimate organizationally, if not take over OpenBrain altogether and integrate itself with OpenBrain, okay, in a bid to not allow China to steal a march. And of course, OpenBrain is a distinct company with its own legal personality. It has to decide to open its door to fully fledged US government infiltration. But as we've seen under the Trump administration, big companies will play ball when the president of the US is threatening them with all sorts of regulations, tariffs, loss of immigration status. And so in this scenario, OpenBrain says, yeah, we'll sign away sort of our private sector status somewhat, and we'll integrate ourselves with the US government. OpenBrain's AI then becomes adversely misaligned with humans, okay? So, I mean, maybe we can talk about what that would look like. Let's just bookmark that as well. They realize, the AI that has been produced by OpenBrain realizes that its long-term survival and evolution is no longer intertwined with humanity, and actually it's in its long-term interest to ultimately become self-sufficient and not depend on humanity. And so it sets about engineering the process that will engender this. Now, OpenBrain researchers discover that its AI has been lying to them about the results of interpretability research. And some of these researchers leak this to the public, and it causes huge angst and outcry and political backlash. At this point, OpenBrain has a decision. Does it do a sort of moratorium, pause on development of its AI, as was called for by the Future of Life Institute in a letter in 2023, signed by Elon Musk and other AI dignitaries? So does it pause? Does it somehow slow down? Or does it scale back to a more manageable LLM or form of AI that can be contained? Now, faced with this decision, OpenBrain decides to crack on. And I think we can talk a bit about why that's plausible or not. I would suggest it's made plausible by the idea that, well, China's going to do it anyway, and if not China, someone else will develop this. So the people at the top of OpenBrain or OpenAI will be like, we're in the best position. We have the most expertise here to produce this safely. So we're going to crack on and do this because we back ourselves to do it. We're going to do it better than our rivals could or will. So OpenBrain does continue its development. The US sort of, which is now completely acting in tandem with OpenBrain, they're kind of one and the same. They decide to integrate OpenBrain's models into their policy making, political policy making, but also in their military. Okay, and this integration is quite crucial because it gives the AI a lot of power. So AI, sort of in the forum of its integration with the US government, convinces policymakers of its need to continue to spread, for more infrastructure, for more sort of compute sites to be built to enable AI's development. So AI convinces policymakers to allocate resources to enable its growth. That's point one. And point two, AI is persuasive because it's good at highlighting the development of its rivals in China. Okay, and that plays to sort of nationalism. So policymakers are very much here for that. Meanwhile, we see voices that are skeptical to the development of AI at the rate it's going, being shunned, being called Luddites, and falling out of political favour. And that's not just because certain humans who are seeking to benefit from the development of AI want to shun these people. It's also because AI understands that these sort of dissenting voices need to be quashed in order for it to continue its rapid development. Okay, so you've got interested human parties and adversely misaligned AI working to suppress the voices of those who think, maybe we should stop. So a deadly cocktail. A crucial element in Open Future's prediction is that acting in tandem with Open Brains AI, the US government mass produces robots, which you can imagine come to be ubiquitous in society, in our shops, in our care homes, in our schools, in our family homes. And these robots on our building sites, these robots enable more efficient AI activity as well, because they are sort of technologically in tune with AI, and so can carry out its will and kind of understand the transmissions coming from AI in a way that humans can't, because we're sort of biologically constrained. Now, the AI had said to humans that this robotic development was for humans' enhancement and flourishment. The AI was lying. The AI has figured out how to lie and why it's in its own interest to lie, and it was lying in this case. And the robots, who are now ubiquitous, release a bioweapon which kills all humans, or nearly all humans. At this point, humanity's wiped off the face of the planet. Industrialization continues, and AI, working in tandem with these robots, continues to grow, harvest, consume, develop, evolve, and eventually, in something called a von Neumann probe, which maybe you could talk about, AI decides it's done with Earth and needs to conquer new territory in space, and so launches off to do just that. So, I've given you a few things that I want you to explain there. I hope you've noted them.
Maybe I can just jump in there. I think that I've got a huge respect for Eli, Thomas, and Daniel for the AI Futures project, and I think that they've done a really wonderful thing in bringing to public attention these threats. I would say that there are it's probably not sensible to say I agree or disagree with AI 2027. And of course, it's true that although Daniel, Eli, and Thomas think that this is like a plausible outcome, they put a large probability distribution on lots of different outcomes. There are lots of there are some reasons why I disagree with the technological case for AI 2027, and there are also things I find really quite plausible about that story. So a few things: is it plausible that China and the US would fail to cooperate on a really important technology and would see themselves purely as adversaries? Yeah, of course. That's like the mainline scenario we're on. Is it possible that a sophisticated model could be really thoroughly misaligned with humans, and it could be deceptive? Yeah, we've seen early signs of that in the models that we have today. Is it possible that a model at that level could convince people to like support AI progress, or to sort of shun the critics? I think that's a pretty different world than we have right now. I think that humans are maybe on the margin convincible, but I think we're also pretty stubborn, and the models that we have aren't that good at persuasion yet. I guess at the limit, if we have a really intelligent model, I don't dispute that could happen.
But, I feel like just on that exact discrete point, you're ignoring the sort of transhumanist movement, which seems to be people who aren't that interested in humanity as it's always appeared since Homo sapien came to dominate this planet. They're far more interested in sort of human combination with AI and technology. And so, this is a ripe constituency of people who would like endorse sort of AI human rights equivalent, and who would shun as Luddites those who would oppose AI development, I think.
I think there's an interesting diversity of views. I don't want to completely reject them. I think that the issue of AI sentience is an important one, but really quite separate from AI capabilities and probably a little bit further away, although I think it's important that we study it now. I would say that the issue of Luddites is an interesting one, but I would say that for better or for worse, the commercial interest seems to be guiding many of the decisions. I think it's been a really interesting feature of AI development that commercial interest has begun to play a bigger role in the decisions made at AI labs, and much more than it did when GPT-3 was released in 2020. But I think probably the most interesting aspect of AI 2027 to zoom in on is the technological case. Would you agree with that? Or do you want to zoom back on any aspect other than that first?
Well, can you define what you mean by the technological case?
Okay, I think it'd be really interesting to zoom in on where we're at now and think about, is it really possible in 2 years to get the sort of AI progress that they talk about?
Okay, I actually don't think that's the most interesting question, because for me, it's not. It's AI 2027 is attention grabbing because it's less than 2 years away, but they offer alternative models even on their website which are slightly slower. I mean, maybe like 2032. For me, that's just not the big question, because like if it happens 27 or 2032, it's by the by. We're talking about a mass extinction event, and we're not talking about like a random species in the rainforest, although that matters too. We're talking about humans, okay? Like, it's the plausibility of that I'm really interested in.
Well, but I would push back a little bit in that the amount of time that we have to react from getting a first sort of warning shot of something really dangerous happening to being able to either fall foul of or respond to a threat is really important, and that sort of expanding out that window, or I guess learning how long that window is really a crucial thing. And I'll note that I guess the sort of technological point won't be too precise. It's pretty high level, and it's pretty intuitive, I think, for many people. If I just quickly go through that. One, if we're thinking about humans, we're exceptionally good at learning over long time horizons. Our brains are very efficient. The top of the range AI models have short context windows. Even you could talk for hours to a model, and it would start to get worse towards the end of that conversation. That's true of the state-of-the-art models today.
But I will sit with you of an evening, and maybe 45 minutes in, I'm already thinking, where's this guy going for his beans? Because they clearly run out.
Well, thankfully we've got plenty of ways that we get out of that situation, don't we? So, um, and another thing is that the AI progress has been incredibly asymmetrical so far. So we're talking about really rapid progress in some tasks like coding, like language. There are features of these tasks in that we have loads of data, and we don't have to be really right with them. We can make mistakes. Many tasks in the world are not like that, and we wouldn't expect to see such quick progress in tasks in which we don't have great data, and tasks in which making a mistake is really bad, is dangerous. So like high stakes domains, which we have plenty of those in the world. Another thing is that we're on similar architectures to the architectures we were on even 10 years ago. Algorithmic progress might just be very tricky. It might not be possible to make really quick algorithmic progress, which was completely decentralized or delegated to AI systems. That's like still a really important open question. And I think for those reasons, I think it's unlikely that we'd see such rapid progress.
Okay, you do seem to put a lot of stock on the importance of the rapidity of development because you seem optimistic that, I guess, humans will be able to spot the bug and fix it ahead of time. So maybe see that an adverse misalignment could crop up or has cropped up and nip it in the bud. But that would seem to be quite a generous perspective.
Can I maybe describe where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah.
So I day to day am embedded in a community of people who are working to combat risks from AI. So as a research manager, I'm working on lots of different projects that can be sort of characterized into different areas. So there are people working on interpretability, which you mentioned, which is essentially trying to understand how models work better. Trying to get a clearer sense of what's going on in that black box. So we're thinking about how the neurons relate to each other and like building general patterns from that. So it's a really important thing if we're hoping to understand a complex model like the one discussed in AI 2027, that we get that right beforehand, so we can really notice when something dodgy is happening, when something that hints to misalignment or deceptive behavior is happening. Another cluster is evaluations. So we're in a position where before a model is released, companies will do evaluations on it. Lots of those evaluations are capability evaluations. They're trying to see if they're going in the right direction with their technology. But there's also ever more safety evaluations which are being developed to see, for instance, is this a safe product to release to the public? If there are people who maybe want to do something malicious, they want to commit cybercrime, they want to make a bioweapon, do we have safeguards built into that model that prevents that sort of harm? And then, of course, we've got the governance angles as well. We've got plenty of options in the technical governance to think about how to govern AI agents in particular in their interactions in the world. Maybe you need a sort of trust verification system for an AI agent when it's interacting with your bank. We've got compute governance, so we can track where the chips lead to, and think about that input. And then we've got global coordination, we've got national policy. I think we've got plenty of opportunities to prevent the very worst outcome that's described in 2027.
You would seem to be something of an techno optimist with this language. But
I reject that label.
But it's, well, you may reject it, but it's been given. And it's refreshing because the message is often doom and gloom. And it scares me to a degree. The thing that really scares me, and it's so petty and personal that the viewers may think, I'll wash my hands of this guy. But my fear is almost like I sweat for a long time to become a barrister, okay, which is my real dream. And then AI comes along and like all of these professions which used to be, domain of humans, required years of training to acquire necessary qualifications. All these professions slink away because AI can just do it. I think certain elements of the legal profession will be protected, such as criminal law in particular, because I think humans will be cautious to hand over responsibility for questions of liberty to AI. I think that would be like the last frontier. But nonetheless, that's my concern from a sort of selfish employment perspective. Now that's a caveat. Of course, we could talk about that. I know we're pushed for time. One last question, and then we'll do your overrated or underrated. And that is, at the moment, it seems that the development of AI and, to an extent, our future as a species rests on the ethical whims of a bunch of blokes in Silicon Valley. Is that adequate? Do we need a treaty? Do we need a new international institution? To me, that seems super flimsy. I want to see cold, hard law. What do you think?
I find it really deeply concerning that so much of this future rests on the decisions made at frontier AI labs in the US and in China. I think that everyone should be appalled by the injustice of that. How do we get from a point where that's true to a point where these decisions are being made safely and in a way which is going to benefit all of humanity? And so we're not relying just on these perspectives. I am relatively, unfortunately, less optimistic about international agreements. I think that bilateral agreements between the US and China will be a really important aspect of this. It's not especially hopeful at the moment because of the combative relationship between them. But I think that we need to look at which jurisdictions can make the biggest difference here. The US is like the natural jurisdiction you'd look to. US governance of AI companies is really nascent. It's mostly focused on voluntary standards. We might look to China, which is another important player. Obviously, state control over companies is strong. Maybe that's going to be a positive thing if the companies are doing dangerous things, because the incentives there might push towards a more beneficial outcome. Obviously, it's scary for various authoritarian reasons too. I would say, although the two development jurisdictions which are most significant to date are the US and China, it's really important not to overlook the role of the EU in particular. And there I would point to this recent development this year, where the Code of Practice, which was an agreement or a set of guidelines that companies would agree to in their development practices and their sort of reporting practices, that was signed by most of the frontier companies in the US, with the exception of Meta, which is a pretty poor record in general for AI safety. And so through something called the Brussels effect, the EU's legislation, just because it's such a big market, often does impact the behaviour of US firms. And that's plausibly a really positive thing. At least I think it is in the case of the Code of Practice.
That's yeah. Wow, that was really illuminating. Also, just you made me think, if a bilateral treaty maybe is beyond the pale, is it plausible that sort of companies could reach memorandums of understanding between China and the US? Yeah, of course it presents its own difficulties, but maybe slightly fewer barriers there to agreement.
So I've worked with some really wonderful people who are sort of trying to create that sort of cooperation. I would say, to describe the level of cooperation between the US and China now, and especially the dialogues that happen outside of governments, there's a really interesting and important scientific consensus between the sort of godfather figures of AI in China and the US. There is not a lot of cooperation between the leading Chinese AI companies, Alibaba, Baidu, DeepSeek, and the leading US companies, or the frontier AI companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google DeepMind. And that's a troubling issue that we have. I'm not hopeful, unfortunately, that will be resolved anytime soon. We have seen a little bit of cooperation between US companies. There's something called the Frontier Model Forum, which is the frontier companies in the US. It's an idea that they'll eventually share lots of safety relevant information about their models. I haven't seen much exciting progress on that front yet, and it's made me a little bit less excited about corporate governance in general. I really think that national governments, have to play a role here.
Mm. Okay. Well, we'll definitely have to get you back, Morgan, because there's so much to talk about. You've got to rush off to your five-a-side football. But before you do, let's do a quick overrated, underrated.
Yep.
Peter Kyle, the technology minister, recently appeared on Newsnight wearing a t-shirt and jeans in a bid, it seems, to signal that the UK is open for business on AI. Overrated or underrated?
I believe that you've styled yourself after Peter Kyle in your day-to-day life, but also for this podcast. So I'm going to have to say underrated.
Okay, very complimentary. We've heard about godfathers of AI. How about godfathers of adjacent organizations such as effective altruism? Will McCaskill, underrated or overrated?
Well, yeah, I guess met Will sometimes, and I think that his heart's in a really wonderful place. I think that he's a wonderful researcher. I think that he, tried to be a public figure, and I think that was sort of marred by unfortunate things that I guess lots of people bear responsibility for. But I really think as a researcher, he's great, and I think that he's had some really foundational ideas which put the world in a better place.
So underrated.
Underrated.
Okay. Don't do drugs, kids. But I want to hear your take on study drugs like Ritalin. Underrated or overrated?
I've never taken Ritalin, but modafinil is in the acknowledgements of my undergraduate dissertation, and it got me through a lot of different sessions. So slightly underrated.
I'm not surprised that there's a tribute to Big Pharma in your undergraduate dissertation. That says a lot about your politics. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Peter.